The morning mist clung to the Argonne forest like a shroud, but beneath its veil, over 1 million American soldiers crouched in their trenches, hearts pounding with anticipation. September 26th, 1918, a date that would echo through history as the largest American military operation ever undertaken on foreign soil. General John Joseph Pershing stood atop a makeshift observation post, his weathered face etched with determination. Behind him stretched the greatest assembly of American military might the world had ever witnessed. 1.2 million doughboys of the American Expeditionary Forces, supported by 2,800 artillery pieces that gleamed ominously in the pre-dawn darkness. "Gentlemen," Pershing addressed his assembled corps commanders, his voice cutting through the morning air like steel. "Today we write the final chapter of this war. The Hun has held these forests for 4 years. Today, we take them back." The Meuse-Argonne sector stretched 47 miles across the Western Front, a nightmare landscape of barbed wire, machine gun nests, and concrete bunkers that the Germans had spent years perfecting. From the heights of Mont Faucon to the dense thickets of the Argonne forest, every hill, every ravine, every tree had been transformed into a fortress designed to bleed any attacking force white. Major General Hunter Liggett of the 1st Corps adjusted his field glasses, surveying the German positions that dotted the landscape like malevolent eyes. "Sir, intelligence reports indicate at least 5 divisions of veteran German troops occupying the first defensive line alone," he reported to Pershing. The American commander nodded grimly. He knew the odds. The German Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria had personally overseen the construction of these defenses. Incorporating lessons learned from 4 years of brutal warfare, the Hindenburg Line's extension through this sector represented the epitome of German military engineering, a maze of interconnected trenches, underground tunnels, and killing fields designed to stop any offensive dead in its tracks. As referenced in contemporary reports from the New York Times war correspondents, embedded with the American forces, the scale of preparation was unprecedented. Supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles, carrying everything from ammunition to medical supplies for what everyone knew would be a grinding, costly campaign. Colonel George Marshall, Pershing's operations officer, approached with the final timetable. "Sir, the artillery barrage commences at 0230 hours. Infantry goes over the top at 0-5-30. Pershing checked his pocket watch -0-2-15. In 15 minutes, the largest artillery bombardment in American military history would announce to the world that the United States Army had come to settle accounts with the German Empire. The general's thoughts drifted momentarily to the long journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years earlier, America had been a reluctant participant in this European catastrophe. Now, his doughboys represented the last best hope for Allied victory. The French were exhausted, the British bled white, and only American industrial might and manpower could tip the scales. A distant rumble began building on the horizon, not thunder, but the coordinated fire of 2,800 American guns, preparing to speak with one voice. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate, a tremor that would soon become an earthquake of steel and high explosive. "Signal all units," Pershing commanded, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. "Operation begins as scheduled. May God have mercy on our souls, because the Germans certainly won't." The thunder was about to become lightning, and the Argonne forest would never be the same. The earth convulsed as if nature itself were in agony. At precisely 2:30 in the morning, 2,800 American artillery pieces erupted in perfect synchronization, their muzzle flashes painting the pre-dawn sky in hellish oranges and reds. The bombardment was so intense that soldiers 20 miles away could feel the ground shake beneath their feet. Colonel Charles Pellet Summerall, commanding the 1st Division Artillery, watched through his periscope as the German lines disappeared beneath a carpet of explosions. 3 hours of this, he muttered to his aide, and there won't be a living soul left in those trenches. But Summerall was wrong, and he would learn just how wrong before the day was through. At precisely 5:30, whistles shrieked along the American front. From the Meuse River to the western edge of the Argonne forest, wave after wave of doughboys climbed from their trenches and began their advance into no man's land. The 77th Division, the 28th Division, the 35th Division, names that would be written in blood and glory. Before this offensive ended, Major Charles Whittlesey of the 77th Division, led his battalion through the early morning mist. His men spread in extended formation across the cratered landscape. The initial advance seemed almost anticlimactic after the thunderous artillery preparation. German return fire was sporadic, disorganized. "Maybe the barrage did its job after all," whispered Sergeant Abraham Krotoshinsky, a Polish immigrant from New York's Lower East Side, who had joined the army to prove his American loyalty. 20 minutes later, they learned the brutal truth about German defensive tactics. The artillery barrage had been a magnificent spectacle, but the Germans had long since learned to shelter their machine gunners in deep, concrete bunkers that could withstand even direct hits from heavy shells. As the American infantry advanced beyond the range of their own supporting fire, these hidden positions came to life with deadly precision. The distinctive rattle of German machine guns spandos. The doughboys called them erupted from concealed positions throughout the forest. Men who had been joking and smoking cigarettes moments before were suddenly diving for whatever cover they could find as bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. Lieutenant Colonel William Donovan of the 165th Infantry, later known as Wild Bill, found himself pinned down in a shell crater with a dozen of his men. 50 yards ahead, a German machine gun nest had them trapped, its crew methodically sweeping the area with devastating crossfire. "We can't stay here," Donovan shouted over the din of battle. "They'll bring up mortar and finish us off." According to wartime dispatches filed by Associated Press correspondent Frederick Palmer, who witnessed the opening phases of the offensive, the American advance quickly bogged down into a series of costly firefights as units encountered the sophisticated German defense system. The German strategy was brilliantly simple and brutally effective: to allow the Americans to advance beyond their artillery support, then trap them in carefully prepared killing zones where every approach was covered by interlocking fields of fire. The dense forest terrain favored the defenders, providing natural concealment while channeling attackers into predictable routes. By noon, the ambitious timetable that had called for American forces to advance 15 miles on the first day lay in ruins. Most units had gained less than a mile, and casualty reports were streaming back to division headquarters with alarming frequency. General Pershing received the sobering updates at his forward command post. "Casualties are heavy, sir," reported his intelligence officer, Major William Mitchell. "The 35th Division alone has lost over 2,000 men, and they've advanced less than half a mile." The American commander studied the tactical maps spread before him, red pins marking confirmed German positions, blue pins showing the forward edge of American advances. The picture was clear and discouraging. They had underestimated both the strength of German defenses and the difficulty of coordinating such a massive assault through dense forest terrain. "Signal all division commanders," Pershing ordered. "Consolidate positions and prepare for renewed assault tomorrow. This is going to take longer than we thought." As night fell over the Argonne forest, the sounds of battle gradually faded to sporadic rifle fire and the groans of wounded men calling for medics. The great offensive had begun, but already it was clear that victory would be measured not in days, but in weeks of grinding, costly warfare. Dawn of September 27th brought no relief to the American forces trapped in the Argonne's deadly embrace. The forest, which had seemed merely ominous in the pre-attack briefings, had revealed itself as a masterpiece of defensive engineering that transformed every dell and ridge into a potential grave. Major General Robert Lee Bullard of the 3rd Corps studied the casualty reports with growing concern. His 17th Division had suffered over 1,500 casualties in the first 36 hours, yet had advanced barely 2 miles. The 37th Division was faring even worse, its advance completely stalled by a network of German strongpoints that seemed to regenerate like a Hydra destroy one machine gun nest, and 2 more would open fire from previously silent positions. "Sir," reported Colonel James Harbord, "the Germans aren't fighting a conventional defense. They're using what they call elastic defense tactics, allowing our troops to advance into prepared kill zones. They're hitting them from multiple directions simultaneously." The German strategy was the brainchild of Crown Prince Ruprecht and his staff, who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of defensive warfare. Rather than holding a rigid front line, they employed a layered system of strongpoints connected by underground tunnels and communication trenches. When Americans attacked one position, German reserves could quickly reinforce threatened sectors while maintaining fire from supporting positions. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, America's leading fighter ace, provided aerial reconnaissance reports that painted a grim picture of the tactical situation. The forest canopy is so dense that our artillery observers can't spot German positions, he reported to Pershing's headquarters. The Hun is using every natural feature to his advantage, and our boys are walking into ambushes. The human cost was staggering. Field hospitals established behind the lines quickly became overwhelmed with casualties. Dr. Harvey Cushing, the famous neurosurgeon, who had volunteered for military service, worked 18-hour shifts trying to save young Americans whose bodies had been shattered by German machine gun fire and artillery. In the Argonne's depths, individual acts of heroism emerged from the larger tapestry of suffering. Sergeant Alvin York of the 82nd Division found himself behind German lines after his patrol was decimated by machine gun fire. Using skills learned hunting in the Tennessee mountains, York systematically eliminated an entire German machine gun section, captured 132 prisoners, and opened a gap that allowed his division to advance. As documented in contemporary military dispatches reviewed by the War Department, York's actions exemplified the fighting spirit of American soldiers who refused to be defeated by the tactical superiority of their opponents. But for every Sergeant York, there were hundreds of anonymous doughboys who died in muddy shell holes or disappeared forever into the forest's green depths. The Argonne was becoming a graveyard of American ambitions. Lieutenant Colonel George Patton, commanding a tank battalion supporting the infantry advance, discovered that his armored vehicles were nearly useless in the dense forest terrain. "These trees are too thick for the tanks to maneuver," he reported to Corps' headquarters. "We're having to abandon the machines and fight as infantry." The weather turned against the Americans as well. Cold October rains transformed the forest floor into a muddy quagmire that made movement difficult and resupply nearly impossible. Wounded men lay for hours in shell holes filling with rainwater, waiting for stretcher bearers who might never come. By October 1st, the great offensive that was supposed to end the war by Christmas had devolved into a series of small unit actions fought for yards of muddy ground. Division commanders reported to Pershing that their units were at 50% strength and dropping. The replacement system, designed to feed fresh troops into depleted units, was breaking down under the sheer volume of casualties. "We're fighting the forest as much as we're fighting the Germans," observed Major General Charles Menaher of the 42nd Division. "Every tree conceals a sniper, every ravine hides a machine gun. This isn't warfare as we've known it, this is 100 separate battles being fought simultaneously." General Pershing faced the first serious crisis of his command. Political pressure from Washington demanded rapid results, but military reality dictated a slower, more methodical approach. The question was whether American resolve would outlast German defensive skill in this green hell that had become the graveyard of so many hopes. The killing ground waited patiently for its next victims. October 2nd, 1918, brought with it a fog so thick that soldiers could barely see 10 yards in any direction. For Major Charles Whittlesey and his 550 men of the 77th Division's 1st and 2nd Battalions, this fog would become both salvation and curse as they prepared for what would become one of the most famous episodes of the entire war. Companies A through H will advance through the Charlevoix Ravine and establish positions on Hill 294. Whittlesey briefed his officers in the pre-dawn darkness. "Division expects us to hold until relief arrives." What Division didn't know was that German forces had quietly reoccupied positions behind the American advance, and Whittlesey's men were walking into a trap that would make them legends. The advance began smoothly enough. Using the fog as cover, the New Yorkers, most of them immigrants from the city's tenements, who had never seen a forest before joining the army, moved through the ravine with surprising stealth. By mid-morning, they had reached their objective and begun digging in on the reverse slope of the hill. Then the fog lifted, and hell descended upon them. German machine guns, positioned on 3 sides of their position, opened fire simultaneously. Within minutes, Whittlesey realized with growing horror that his battalion was completely surrounded. The relief force that was supposed to follow their advance had been stopped cold by German counterattacks, leaving the lost battalion, as history would know them, completely isolated in enemy territory. Sergeant Abraham Krotoshinsky, a Polish immigrant who had survived the opening day's slaughter, found himself in a shell hole with 5 other men as German bullets whined overhead. "Major," he called to Whittlesey, "what are our orders?" "We hold," came the reply, steady despite the circumstances. "We hold until relief arrives." But relief was not coming, as documented in military archives later examined by the American Battle Monuments Commission. German forces had launched a coordinated counteroffensive that trapped not just Whittlesey's battalion, but isolated American units throughout the sector. The Great Offensive had become a series of desperate last stands. For 5 days, the lost battalion endured conditions that defied human endurance. German artillery pounded their position continuously. Sniper fire picked off anyone who showed themselves during daylight hours. Food ran out after the second day. Water became so scarce that men licked dew from leaves and drank from muddy shell holes. On October 4th, the situation became even more desperate when American artillery, unaware of the battalion's position, began shelling their own men. Whittlesey had no radio contact with headquarters, no way to call off the deadly friendly fire that was killing his soldiers as efficiently as German bullets. Private Cherami, a carrier pigeon, became the battalion's last hope. Whittlesey hastily scrawled a message. "We are along the road parallel to 294.4. Our own artillery is dropping directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." The bird was released into a sky filled with shrapnel and small arms fire. Cherami was hit by German fire, but continued flying, delivering the message that saved the remaining men from their own artillery. The pigeon, later awarded the French Croix de Guerre, had lost an eye and suffered a shattered breastbone, but had completed the mission. German attempts to capture the position intensified. On October 5th, a German officer approached under a white flag with a surrender demand. Whittlesey's response became legendary. "Go to hell." The siege continued. Private First Class Archie Peck from the Bronx wrote in his diary, "Later recovered by Graves registration teams, we're down to our last ammunition. Boys are dying all around me. By Dania, but the major says we hold, so we hold. Mama always said I was too stubborn for my own good." By October 6th, the battalion was reduced to fewer than 200 effective fighting men. German attacks came in waves, each one bringing enemy soldiers closer to overrunning the American position. Hand-to-hand fighting became common as German stormtroopers penetrated the defensive perimeter. Captain Nelson Holderman, severely wounded but refusing evacuation, organized the defense of the battalion's eastern flank. "Every man who can hold a rifle gets a position," he ordered. Clerks, walking wounded, everyone fights. The lost battalion had become a symbol of American determination, though they didn't know it yet. Newspaper headlines back home screamed their story across front pages, and the entire nation held its breath waiting for word of their fate. But in their muddy hell in the Argonne forest, Major Whittlesey and his dwindling band of survivors knew only that they had been ordered to hold. And hold they would, regardless of the cost. Relief was finally coming, but it would arrive almost too late. October 7th dawned gray and cold, with the sound of distant artillery growing steadily louder. For the survivors of the lost battalion, huddled in their muddy shell holes and improvised trenches, those guns represented either salvation or the final bombardment that would finish them off. They had no way of knowing that General Pershing had committed his strategic reserves to a desperate rescue operation. "Sir, the 78th Division is advancing toward the lost battalion's position," reported Colonel George Marshall to Pershing at the 1st Army headquarters. "But German resistance is fierce. They're throwing everything they have at our relief columns." Pershing studied the tactical maps with grim determination. The rescue of Whittlesey's battalion had become more than a military. Necessity had become a symbol of American resolve that could not be allowed to fail. "Signal General Alexander," he ordered. "The 78th Division will punch through, regardless of cost. Those boys have earned their relief." The relief operation became a microcosm of the larger offensive that was slowly but inexorably grinding through German defenses throughout the Meuse-Argonne sector. What had begun as a rapid breakthrough attempt had evolved into a systematic destruction of German defensive positions. One strong point at a time. Major General Alexander, commanding the 78th Division, personally led his troops in the final assault to reach the lost battalion. "We're going straight through," he told his regimental commanders. "No flanking movements, no tactical subtlety. We punch a hole and keep punching until we reach our boys." The attack commenced at dawn with a concentrated artillery barrage that shook the forest to its roots. German positions that had held for days under sporadic bombardment crumbled under the focused fury of massed American artillery. For the first time since the offensive began, American firepower was concentrated on a narrow front with devastating effect. At 8:30 in the morning, the infantry of the 307th and 308th Regiments advanced through the smoke and devastation. German machine gun nests that had dominated the terrain for weeks were systematically eliminated by small teams of riflemen and grenadiers working in coordination. According to contemporary reports filed by war correspondent Floyd Gibbons, who accompanied the relief force, the advance took on the character of a crusade as word spread that they were fighting to save the lost battalion. By noon, advance elements of the 78th Division had broken through the German encirclement. Lieutenant Richard Tillman of Company G, 307th Infantry, became the first relief soldier to reach Major Whittlesey's position. Major Whittlesey? Tillman called out cautiously, unsure if the ragged figures emerging from their holes were American soldiers or German infiltrators. Present, came the reply, in a voice hoarse from 5 days without adequate water. Lieutenant, you're a sight for sore eyes. Of the 550 men who had advanced into the Charlevoix ravine 5 days earlier, only 194 answered roll call when relief arrived. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing in the green hell of the Argonne forest. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The heroic stand of the lost battalion had tied down an entire German division that might otherwise have been used to reinforce threatened sectors of the line. More importantly, their story had captured American imagination and demonstrated that American soldiers possessed the same fighting spirit that had won independence and preserved the Union. The rescue of the lost battalion marked a turning point in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. German resistance, while still fierce, was becoming less coordinated as the systematic destruction of their defensive network continued. Key strongpoints, like the Cape de Chatillon and Hill 312, fell to renewed American assaults. General Erich von Falkenhayn, commanding German forces in the sector, reported to Supreme Command that American fighting quality has improved markedly since the offensive began. Their coordination of artillery and infantry is becoming more effective, and their soldiers are showing remarkable tenacity under fire. By mid-October, the great German defensive system that had held the Argonne forest for 4 years was beginning to crack. American forces, learning painful lessons with each attack, were finally beginning to master the tactics necessary to overcome sophisticated defensive positions. Private Cher Ami, the heroic carrier pigeon, recovered from his wounds and became a symbol of American determination. The bird was eventually retired to the United States and lived out his days as a celebrated veteran of the Great War. The lost battalion had been found, but the greater battle for the Argonne forest continued with undiminished fury. October 20th brought news that electrified American forces throughout the Meuse-Argonne sector. German defenses were finally beginning to collapse under the relentless pressure of sustained American attacks. After nearly a month of grinding warfare that had cost thousands of American lives, the systematic destruction of German strongpoints was approaching its climax. General Pershing received the intelligence reports at his forward headquarters with cautious optimism. German prisoners report widespread desertion in rear echelon units, Major William Mitchell informed him. Their ammunition supplies are running critically low. Several divisions have been reduced to less than 50% strength. The transformation in American fighting effectiveness had been remarkable to witness. Units that had been decimated in the opening days of the offensive had been rebuilt and retrained, incorporating hard-won lessons about forest warfare. The 42nd Division, now commanded by Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur, after his promotion, exemplified this evolution. "We're not the same army that crossed those trenches on September 26th, MacArthur observed to his staff officers. "We've learned to fight their kind of war, and now we're better at it than they are." The American tactical doctrine had evolved through trial and error into a sophisticated system of combined arms warfare. Artillery barrages were now precisely coordinated with infantry advances. Small unit tactics emphasized infiltration rather than frontal assault. Most importantly, American soldiers had learned to use the forest terrain to their advantage rather than fighting against it. Sergeant York, now promoted and wearing the Medal of Honor, had become a symbol of American fighting prowess that even German soldiers respected. "The Americans fight like wildcats now," reported a captured German officer during interrogation. In the beginning, they were brave but foolish. Now they are brave and cunning, which makes them very dangerous indeed. The strategic situation throughout the Western Front was changing rapidly. British forces had broken through the Hindenburg Line in the north. While French armies were advancing along the Aisne River, Germany was fighting a three-front war. As American reinforcements continued to arrive in France at the rate of 10,000 men per day, on October 26th, American forces achieved a breakthrough that had seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The 78th Division, veterans of the Lost Battalion Rescue Operation, captured the village after a fierce three-day battle that eliminated the last major German strongpoint in the central Argonne sector. Colonel James Harbord, now commanding the 2nd Division, led his Marines and soldiers in a coordinated assault that captured the heights overlooking the Meuse River. "The Hun is finished in this sector," he reported to Corps headquarters. "His defensive line has been irreparably breached." As documented in official Army records maintained by the War Department's Historical Division, American casualties for the entire Meuse-Argonne offensive had reached staggering proportions, over 120,000 killed, wounded, and missing.
Ow.
But these losses had purchased something invaluable: the collapse of German resistance in the most heavily fortified sector of the Western Front. German High Command was receiving desperate reports from all sector commanders. The Crown Prince's army group, which had held the Argonne Forest for 4 years, was in full retreat toward the Belgian border. American artillery now dominated the battlefield. German counterattacks were becoming increasingly feeble and poorly coordinated. The human dimension of this military success was written in letters home by surviving American soldiers. Corporal James Sullivan of the 26th Division wrote to his mother in Boston, "Ma, we've been through hell and back, but we've won. The Germans are running now, and we're chasing them as fast as our legs can carry us. This war is almost over, and we won it." By November 1st, American forces had advanced over 30 miles from their starting positions, capturing strategic rail junctions and supply depots that the German army desperately needed to maintain its defensive positions. The great fortress of the Argonne Forest, which had seemed impregnable just 5 weeks earlier, now lay in American hands. General Pershing issued a special order to his troops. "The First Army has accomplished its mission. The German defensive system has been broken, and the enemy is in retreat along the entire front. Your courage and sacrifice have brought victory within sight." But even as military victory approached, rumors were circulating through both armies that political developments might end the fighting before American forces could complete their pursuit of the retreating German forces. The final chapter of the Great War was about to be written. November 11th, 1918, 11 o'clock in the morning, the guns fell silent along the entire Western Front, from the North Sea to the Swiss border. The roar of artillery that had thundered continuously for 4 years suddenly ceased. In the Argonne Forest, where American soldiers had fought and died for 47 days, an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield like a shroud. General Pershing stood in his field headquarters, reading the armistice terms that had been negotiated in Marshal Foch's railway car in the forest. Of the German Empire had accepted defeat, and the war that was supposed to end all wars was finally over. But for Pershing, the moment brought mixed emotions: relief that the killing had stopped, but frustration that his armies had been denied the opportunity to march into Germany and demonstrate American military supremacy conclusively. "Sir," reported Colonel George Marshall, "casualty reports for the Meuse-Argonne offensive are now complete. Total American losses, 26,000 dead, 95,000 wounded. German losses in the sector are estimated at over 100,000. The statistics were staggering, but they told only part of the story. The Meuse-Argonne offensive had involved more American soldiers than any military operation in the nation's history. Over 1.2 million doughboys had participated in the campaign that broke the back of German resistance and hastened the end of the war. Throughout the Argonne Forest, soldiers from both sides emerged cautiously from their positions, many unable to believe that the fighting had actually ended. Sergeant York, now a celebrity whose exploits were being celebrated in newspapers around the world, sat quietly in his foxhole, reflecting on the terrible cost of victory. "Boys," he told his squad, "we did what we came to do. The Kaiser's army is finished, and democracy has won. Now we can all go home." But going home would prove more complicated than anyone imagined. The American Expeditionary Forces had grown into a massive military machine that couldn't simply be dismantled overnight. Demobilization would take months, and many American soldiers would remain in Europe well into 1919. For the survivors of the Lost Battalion, the armistice brought a particularly poignant moment. Major Whittlesey, now promoted to lieutenant colonel and awarded the Medal of Honor, gathered his remaining men for a final roll call. Of the 550 soldiers who had entered the Charlevoix ravine in early October, fewer than 200 were present to hear the news that the war was over. "We held," Whittlesey told them simply. "We did what we were ordered to do, and now it's finished." The strategic impact of the Meuse-Argonne offensive extended far beyond its immediate military results. American forces had demonstrated that the United States possessed both the industrial capacity and the military capability to project power globally. The Doughboys had proven themselves the equals of any soldiers in the world, earning respect from allies and enemies alike. As referenced in post-war analyses by military historians at the Army War College, the offensive had fundamentally changed the balance of power in Europe and established the United States as a major world power whose voice would have to be heard in international affairs. The human cost had been enormous. Every American family seemed to know someone who had died in the Argonne Forest or returned home bearing the physical and psychological scars of modern warfare. The generation that had answered President Wilson's call to make the world safe for democracy would carry these memories for the rest of their lives. In the years that followed, veterans of the Meuse-Argonne offensive would gather annually to remember their fallen comrades and celebrate their shared triumph. The American Battle Monuments Commission would eventually construct memorials throughout the Argonne Forest, marking the spots where American soldiers had fought and died in democracy's cause. General Pershing's final report to the War Department summarized the achievement. The American Expeditionary Forces have accomplished their mission. German military power has been broken, and the principles of democratic government have been vindicated on the battlefield. The courage and sacrifice of American soldiers have earned for our nation a position of honor among the victorious Allies. As the sun set on November 11, 1918, the guns remained silent on the Argonne Forest, where so much American blood had been spilled. Wildflowers would eventually grow over the battlefields where democracy had proven its worth against autocracy. The Great War was over, and America had helped win it.